Hey, welcome everyone. So glad to have you all here. My name's Allison Faust. I work for Huntsman Cancer Institute in our Office of Community Outreach and Engagement. I am our programs manager and primarily am working with many of our rural communities across the Mountain West in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Nevada, and Utah to help sort of expand outreach efforts and prevention education in the area we serve here at Huntsman Cancer Institute. So thank you all for being here for our first Mountain West Cancer Collaborative webinar series. We're so excited to have you here and look forward to your feedback to continue to improve these webinars and the content as we move forward. I'm going to start with a little bit of an introduction here before I hand off the time to our presenters. The way that we're going to spend our time today really is an introduction to what the Mountain West Cancer Collaborative is, how Huntsman Cancer Institute is working with these states and expanding our outreach. And then I'm going to turn over the time to Dr. Teresa Warner, who's the Deputy Director of the Comprehensive Cancer Center here at HCI, to really just do an overview of what clinical trials look like in the Mountain West. We'll have some time for question and answer. We want this to be an interactive session for you all where you can ask questions, but we also want to learn from you as well. And so we do, during the Q&A, also have questions for you all, and you're welcome to turn on your cameras at that time and participate in a discussion. Then we're really excited to be able to hear from Lacey Reddick, who will be talking about what clinical trials look like in her area of Rock Springs, Wyoming. And then we'll close out hearing from our clinical trials office here at HCI about what kind of supports are available for those who are interested in implementing clinical trials in their healthcare systems. So that's our plan for today. Starting off with a little bit of an introduction and setting the stage for today's conversation. Here at Huntsman Cancer Institute, we really want to truly understand cancer from its beginnings and use that knowledge in the creation and the improvement of cancer treatments. We want to relieve the suffering of cancer patients and be able to provide education about cancer prevention and cancer care in the areas we serve. Oops, apologies. Huntsman Cancer Institute's vision is that we have passionate individuals and teams delivering a cancer-free frontier through scientific discovery and human touch. Now, you've heard me reference already several times the term the areas we serve. So essentially what this means is this is our catchment area. We refer to it as the area we serve. But it consists of Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, and Nevada. Initially, when Huntsman Cancer Institute was established, we were serving the state of Utah. And the work that has been happening over the years has increased. And in 2021, we formalized our commitment to the 5-state Mountain West and formally expanded to Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Utah, and Wyoming. Now, what exactly does that mean? This looks like a couple different things. And so I want to highlight our clinical affiliate network. This is really relevant to the conversation we're going to be having today. And what is a clinical affiliate for those of you that are not familiar? Essentially, Huntsman Cancer Institute has several affiliate sites in these states, and we're able to provide them with access to a variety of additional treatment options, give them access to our top cancer experts, give them expedited care for patients that do require services at Huntsman Cancer Institute. But primarily, the goal is to be able to give these sites the ability to treat patients closer to their homes in their rural communities without traveling to Huntsman Cancer Institute for every single treatment. So, what do we do and how do we support those sites? It looks different for every state, but we're able to help with things like clinic design, layout, operational startup support, training, physician assistance, patient education, clinical trial infrastructure and supports, which you'll hear about today, and shared patient care coordination between those sites and HCI. The services that are offered obviously vary between these states as well. So, but a lot of these sites, we see things like telegenetic counseling and select clinical trials offered. So we will be hearing from Lacey Reddick talking a little bit about what their site specifically offers. But many of you probably know Megan Provost, and she works primarily with our affiliate sites. And then you'll hear from our clinical trials office today on how they support those specific services at these sites. The second thing that I wanted to highlight in terms of expansion, or this formalized expansion into the area we serve, is our Office of Community Outreach and Engagement. This team has also expanded over the last year with 3 new hires to help be able to work with these states a little bit more intentionally. What the Office of Community Outreach and Engagement does is work with comprehensive cancer control programs, cancer coalitions, health systems, and community-based organizations in the Mountain West to help increase knowledge, increase awareness of cancer risk factors, prevention, screening, treatment, and even clinical trials. So we play a role in clinical trial education as well. Our strategies look, we have specifically an American Indian program. We work really closely with what we call our community advisory board to really make sure we are hearing from our community partners on what their needs are and how we as HCI can then help support those efforts. We have health educators on our community outreach team that provide education through health events, through community presentations, and through mentorship and internships. And then currently we are working to help support these states in strategic planning, research supports, and really diving into what does clinical trial education look like at a community level. Now, you heard me mention today that this is our first Mountain West Cancer Collaborative webinar. This is a new sort of framework that we have established, really to just help bring together the efforts that are already existing and put sort of a framework around that. And so, you know, this collaborative really is designed to be a place where cancer patients, survivors, caregivers, community members, public health workers, and health systems in all of those 5 states can come together and share resources, network, be able to hear from one another's unique perspectives, attend training and education opportunities such as today's webinar, and receive updates from HCI on relevant activities and research projects that are taking place in your areas. But this really is designed to be a collaborative space, but also to help foster bidirectional learning. We don't want this to be Huntsman Cancer Institute coming into communities and saying, this is what we need, or this is what you need. We want to learn from you. And so there will be a lot of listening and learning on our part, hence the discussion questions we have for you all planned later in this webinar. We also have a newsletter as part of this to help you stay informed about things that we know that are happening in your areas. But a couple of things that this is not going to be. I want to be very clear that this is not a formal coalition with its own strategic plan. We will continue to collaborate with the existing local and state and regional coalitions and tribes for implementation of cancer prevention strategies. We're not going to be a decision-making body, and there will be no official membership with dues or fees or anything like that. So we want this to be a very collaborative space that is open to anyone. So if you heard about this webinar through a different avenue and not through our Mountain West Cancer Collaborative newsletter, I encourage you to take out your phones, scan this QR code, and sign up for our email list. This is a great way to stay up to date on things that are happening. We only send emails a couple times a month, generally just one newsletter. And if there are any other relevant things that you need to know about in the meantime, you'll receive a separate email for that, like we did for this webinar. But we try to be very considerate of your very, very messy inboxes and don't want to overburden you. So I promise I will not send you daily emails. Please take a minute. I'll stay on this slide for just 1 second. And we, of course, are recording this, and I will send out a link with the recording on where you can opt into this as well. Okay, so that concludes my introduction, and I'm so excited to be able to introduce Dr. Teresa Warner here today to talk about clinical trials in the Mountain West. Dr. Warner is a professor in the Division of Oncology, Department of Medicine at the University of Utah School of Medicine, as an investigator at Huntsman Cancer Institute, and a member of the Experimental Therapeutics Program. Dr. Warner is a specialist in adult medical oncology, and her main areas of expertise is in gynecologic malignancies. Dr. Warner is passionate about women's health, and she is an advocate for cancer prevention and cancer screening. In her role as Senior Director of Clinical Research for Huntsman Cancer Institute, she oversees clinical research, including clinical trials for patients in Utah and the Mountain West. So Dr. Warner, I would love to turn the time over to you.
Allison, thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. I just want to welcome everybody. I'm so excited that our Office of Community Outreach and Engagement has started this Mountain West Collaborative, and more importantly, this webinar series. We love to get to interact with you, and so we're going to take advantage of technology like we are today so that you guys get to know us better and we get to know you better. So I'm going to start off the presentation with an overview of really what's clinical research, what are clinical trials, what we're doing at Huntsman, and how we're serving the Mountain West. And we would love to hear from you guys about ways that we could do that last thing even better, right? We seem to be really good about getting patients to come here, but part of my job in the role as deputy director is figuring out how we could do clinical trials and keep patients in the community where you all live. So next slide. So I just briefly want to talk about cancer research. I'm not going to read these slides to you, but when we talk about clinical trials, it's a subset of cancer research, and it can be, and research can start from basic science research, and so that's kind of fundamentally what you think there with a little microscope and the cells or organoids or whatever those are on that slide. And so these would be like scientists, PhD scientists generally, who are in the lab. And if you skip down to the third one, population-based research is very strong here at Huntsman as well as in the community. And that's really looking at cancer care and research in specific populations. And so these are generally PhDs as well. And they tend to do what we call dry lab research. So they're not, in a traditional lab. And then lastly would be clinical and translational research is what my area, and Jessica and Gayatri and Lacey, who are on the call, that's kind of what we do. We like to take ideas from the basic scientists and the population health sciences and move them into the clinic, namely in the form of clinical trials. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Next. And so if you think about cancer clinical research, there are really two main types of studies. Observational, so you're not really dealing with patients, and then the second type would be clinical trials, and that can include clinical research or translational research. Next. And so just wanted to remind everybody the definition of a clinical trial, because a lot of people think it's all about new medicines that are coming, but there are lots of different things that qualify for a clinical trial. So specifically, the definition from the National Institutes of Health is as follows. It's a research study in which one or more human subjects are prospectively assigned to one or more interventions, and that could include placebo or another control, to evaluate the effects of those interventions on health-related, biomedical, or behavioral outcomes. Okay, so clinical trials are closely monitored, and a lot of times we think of them as new interventions for cancer patients. And a lot of times what we're looking for is there a better way to prevent cancer? Is there a better way to screen or diagnose someone with cancer? or the majority of what I do is, finding new treatments for cancer. And, I talk to patients about this all the time because there's a lot of stigma, I think, about a clinical trial. Either they don't know what a clinical trial is or never heard of it, or they worry that, they're going to be a test subject in some way. And so, I think it's important for us as physicians and people who work in cancer to talk to patients about the benefits. And I use the example of, namely, all the treatments that we use today to treat cancer came from a clinical trial. So that's an important point, I think, that patients sometimes don't understand. Next. And so there are all different phases of clinical trials, and we do all of these phases here at Huntsman, from preclinical, where we're not in patients yet, to phase 1 trials, where we're really looking at safety of medicines, namely. And then when we move to phase 2, it tends to be a little bit larger of a trial, and maybe we're still trying to find the right dose, maybe get some signals on how efficacious a treatment is. And then phase 3 is kind of what a lot of people think about. These are the larger trials where really you're comparing the new experimental therapy to a control or the current standard therapy. And then phase 4 is when they're doing a lot of post-market analysis, and that could be hundreds and hundreds of, hundreds of thousands of patients. Most cancer clinical trials will usually complete a phase 3, and then that can go on to get FDA approval and licensing of the drug. Next. And this is something that, we always like to tell patients, is that the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, which is a national network across the United States of academic cancer centers, believes that the best management of any cancer patient is in a clinical trial, and participation in a clinical trial is especially encouraged. And so, again, it's about education to the community, and having doctors feel comfortable talking about the fact that, you could, walk in the door and do a screening clinical trial and, not even have cancer yet, for example. So it's not traditionally, I don't have any treatments left, so now I'm going to consider a clinical trial. So again, part of our job is to really educate the community and our patients about participation in clinical trials. Next. And then briefly, Allison hit on this a little bit, and you guys are all aware that HCI has made a commitment to serve the Mountain West. So in 2023, we expanded the area that we serve from the state of Utah to the 5-state Rocky Mountain West. And we also, if there's anybody on the call from Colorado, we participate in Colorado. We work with Colorado as well, but it's a really vast geography. And if we think about it, there are a lot of frontier and rural populations here. So frontier being less than 7 people per square mile, and rural less than 100 people per square mile. And this is a rapidly growing population base in the U.S., actually the fastest in the U.S. And so we are challenged with the increasing diversity and the changing demographics of this area that we serve. And it is 17% of the U.S. landmass, which is a lot of space. And so while there might not be as many people in some of the, compared to the East Coast, it's big distances our patients have to travel. And you guys can see here from the map on the right, HCI is there with the star. Our affiliates, which we're going to talk about, are the little purple. And then if you look at NCI designated cancer centers across the US, those are represented by the blue dots. And what you can see is there are a lot on the upper East Coast, for example, some through the Midwest, and then a lot in California along the West Coast, but no other NCI designated cancer area in the 5 states that are in the area that we serve. So that was, really important for those of us at HCI to realize it was the right thing to do to advance access and cancer clinical care and research in this area. And then we do have 3 satellite sites. Four coming. Our site on the west side of town is being built. And then we have 6 affiliate hospitals that we work with as well. And I just want to explain that in case any of you on the call are not from one of the affiliate sites. So those are, contracted services with the University of Utah and Huntsman Cancer Institute to advance clinical care, clinical services, access to healthcare. And so we have a formal relationship with those centers. But as HCI, we want to serve all the patients in this, Mountain West area. So again, so if you're not one of the affiliate sites, we still want to work with you. We still want to bring clinical trials to your area, and we still want to be able to help you as well. Next. And so I really do like this map on the left because it shows how much frontier, remember, less than 7 patients per square mile in those areas. So a lot of Montana, Wyoming, and Nevada, and a significant amount of Idaho and Utah as well. And then the dark green is urban, and the in-between green is rural counties. So you can see where we're located and where our affiliate sites are located as well. So a large land mass and a lot of rural and frontier populations that we need to access and be able to help. And then we do look at the priority cancers in the Mountain West. So the left-hand column shows the cancers that have the highest incidence in our Mountain West area. And breast, lung, and colorectal are very common across the US. The interesting thing is we have a higher percentage of prostate cancer patients and melanoma, probably because of our love of outdoors and the higher altitude in many of our states. And then if you look at the 5, most serious as far as overall mortality cancers go in our area: lung, prostate, breast, colorectal, and pancreas. So again, those are areas of cancer research that we like to focus on as well, but those aren't the only areas. Next. And I just want to show you guys this picture because I know we're talking about clinical trials today, but Huntsman, when we opted to name the area that we serve in the Mountain West, we actually thought about all aspects of cancer care. And so clinical partnerships have been, very advanced. We're going to be talking about research partnerships today. But we couldn't do this without our community outreach and engagement office, with our community partnerships. And within those areas, we also have an obligation for education and training, as well as utilization of data and health assessments of the area. And what ties us all together are communication and policy change. So these are sort of our 6 domains in the area that we serve that we really want to, that we've identified as key strategic areas. And then you guys are going to probably be tired of seeing this map of the 5 states, but you'll notice Colorado's on this one too. So that's why I like this one. It shows our affiliate sites, including Grand Junction, Colorado. So if any of you guys were at the Mountain West Summit that we hosted here, we got to hear from Grand Junction, Colorado. And today we're going to hear from Lacey regarding their work at Sweetwater Memorial Hospital. And then also too, one of the other things that we're doing to broaden access to Huntsman is our cancer screening and education bus. I think currently we're limited to the state of Utah, but I think the group has been very good at being creative to get right along the border so that we can have exposure to, Nevada, Colorado, Wyoming, and Idaho as well. And, one of our great examples are targeting rural and marginalized patients for screening mammograms, noticing a lot of those women did not have access, did not understand the importance of screening to detect early breast cancer. So with our mobile screening unit, there have been over 6,000 women who've been served to date, and over half of them don't speak English. And then we've been able to get 60% of those mammograms paid for by Medicaid or other charitable vouchers. So again, exposing patients in our community who might not have access to good screening techniques is one of the things. The education bus does a lot of other education and screening procedures as well, not just mammograms. And we have funding for a second mobile unit that hopefully we'll have sometime next year. And then this is what I sort of alluded to earlier. One of the things that, when I first started working here, we realized that, patients who live far away need to have access to the clinical trials. And so you can see from the map, the 5-state Mountain West area, and the dark green areas are counties where we have had patients travel here to enroll on a clinical trial. So a lot of the patients, so over 30% of the patients that we see at HCI come from a distance of 150 miles away or greater. So those would be anybody that's outside that red circle. So that's 150 mile radius away from HCI. And when you look at the number of patients that come from a distance, we're actually able to achieve an equal rate of accrual to our therapeutic clinical trials. So about 30% of our treatment accruals come from far away. And we realize the immense burden that might have on some patients. So we've employed a lot of strategies to help facilitate their travel here to the center, including gas cards, travel vouchers, housing subsidies for these patients, as well as meals when they're here, et cetera. So we understand it's a big commitment, and we want to help patients as much as possible. And 25% of the patients that we accrue to clinical trials come from those rural or frontier counties that I showed you earlier. So again, that's one of the pearls and challenges of being the only cancer center in that area, that patients do have to travel far away. And one of the things that we've done is try to design some of our clinical trials to help decrease that burden on patients that live far away. But then what we're going to talk about toward the end of my presentation is, yeah, we want to be able to bring patients to Huntsman, but the next phase of our outreach is really trying to do clinical trials in any way we can in your area, so that patients don't have to travel these distances. And this is an example of the clinical trials that I just talked about in decreasing, patient time away from their home. So short course radiation therapy is sort of a newer term. It's also known as hypofractionated radiation, where you can have 1 or 2 treatments a day to maybe decrease the time. So the issue with radiation therapy is that it's usually a daily treatment, Monday through Friday. And so sometimes patients are away from their home for 5 to 6 weeks at a time, which is sometimes not feasible for patients. And we had noticed in a study that we had done that many of our breast cancer patients who had undergone lumpectomy and are, you should have radiation as part of that, would forego that radiation therapy just because of the distance from the hospital and the need for daily treatments. So by thinking outside the box and reducing the number of treatment days, it made it more feasible for a lot of our rural and frontier patients. And so this is just an example of a lot of the trials that we've done here. And IIT stands for Investigator Initiated Trial, for those of you that aren't familiar with that term. So that's a trial that's been designed and written by one of our doctors here at Huntsman. And to date, we've had 11 different trials, a lot in breast and now gynecologic cancer, and most recently in pancreas cancer, with over 400 patients treated with this short course radiation. And so when we look at least the initial trials that we've done, we've saved over 10 years of patient time away from their home by participating in these trials. So again, this is really our doctors being creative and thinking about ways to minimize travel and impact on a patient's life when they live far away. And then just wanted to update you on other things that we're doing. So the Huntsman can participate in the National Cancer Institute national trials. And we hold grants sponsored by the NCI. So that allows us access to the NCI. And any of our affiliate sites can become NCI affiliate sites to Huntsman. So while we hold the main contract or the grant, we have successfully had affiliate sites become our NCI affiliates, so to speak. So Grand Junction was the first. Rock Springs and Sweetwater, which Lacey's going to talk about, was our second. The VA hospital here in Salt Lake City, it's not part of the University of Utah, so they became an affiliate. And what that does is that allows access to those patients in that area to these sort of cutting edge National Cancer Institute trials as well. One of the other things, the Huntsman has hired a new rural and frontier patient navigator, and that really does allow more direct communication and coordination of care for patients who live far away to come to Huntsman. And we are trying to build on that rural patient navigation to include clinical trials education and coordination for clinical trials as well. HCI is the home to the only proton therapy, which is a newer, maybe less toxic form of radiation therapy. So we're the only center in the Mountain West. And we also have the most comprehensive phase 1 program in the Mountain West. But again, these are all patients having to come to Huntsman. So one of the things that we've now developed is this new patient-centric trial team. And really the goal is to figure out investigator-initiated trials that we can do in the rural and frontier populations that are designed with what we call decentralized clinical trial components. So maybe you don't have to come to Huntsman for the blood draw. Maybe you don't have to come to Huntsman to see the doctor. Maybe we can do the imaging closer to home. So that's the new way that we're thinking about doing clinical trials to, again, reduce burden and travel on patients in this large area. And so we've started a lot of these things that are on this slide. So you'll be hearing this term decentralized clinical trials, or DCTs. And what we can do is recruit patients remotely. So we take advantage of telehealth consult visits. So if someone lives in Montana, I can have a consult visit with them and talk to them about, a clinical trial and answer their questions without them having to travel. Because the worst thing is to bring somebody all the way down and, find out they're maybe not eligible or not even interested in a clinical trial. So if we can do our telehealth consult visits remotely, that makes it much easier on the patient. And then if they're interested in a trial, a lot of times we can consent them remotely. So in the old days, even prior to COVID, patients would have to come and physically, sign the form with a witness. And now we can do that remotely. One of the other things that we've started doing too is mobile phlebotomy. So can we do labs at the local hospital? Yes, we've started doing that. Can we have a mobile unit go out and, collect the blood? So there are certain types of bloods that you can collect and then ship back to the main center. Again, using wearables or home-based monitoring for side effects, symptoms, and then collecting that data remotely through a smartphone app or a wearable device, for example, that records your blood pressure or your sleep habits, for example. And then one of the other things that we found is really important is how we collaborate with our local healthcare providers. So those of you in the community and the federally qualified health centers. And then I'm going to briefly talk about this model that we're developing called clinical trials at home. One of the things that we've done, and many of you, I think, participated in our needs assessment. We reached out and had meetings with the folks at, in multiple of the states, including our affiliate sites, to determine, were they interested in clinical trials? What infrastructure, what operating procedures do they have at, their facilities, their hospitals, or their community centers? And we were not shocked to find that people were really interested in clinical trials and having those available for their patients, but unfortunately not having the infrastructure, the staffing, or maybe even the expertise to conduct these clinical trials. And so what we've done is develop this toolkit to sort of get that process started for any and all of you who are interested. A lot of our researchers here have participated. I think you guys heard this too at the Mountain West Summit. The first survey that we've done of healthcare assessment across the Mountain West area. And I was dismayed, and I won't say totally shocked, but sort of, at the some of the things that we found. And almost 90% of patients that were surveyed had never heard of a clinical trial or did not know what one was. And so we have a lot of work to do on education, and we have started focus groups and some educational initiatives, including using our mobile unit and, becoming creative with, micro videos and text messaging about, the importance of clinical trials. And again, utilizing telehealth and all of our digital oncology solutions. So we have gone out to a lot of your states, including the site in Colorado and Rock Springs, and launched the clinical trials programs and pilots at those areas. And then many of you may know we have a program here called Huntsman at Home, which is a home care, sort of like a home health, but home care delivery system that we have piloted here to really kind of mimic a hospital at home, so to speak. And we've demonstrated that that has reduced ER visits and readmissions to the hospital and overall cost to the patient and the healthcare system. And that has been piloted in 3 rural counties in Utah. And we're going to build on this pilot to think how we can do clinical trials at home. And so this slide is just, you can kind of really focus on the graphic on the bottom right, but Dr. Kathy Mooney, who's one of our researchers here who founded the Huntsman at Home program, is a co-PI with me on this submission that we did to the federal government, trying to do rural huntsman at home. So we're going to pilot that in other counties. You can see there on the left in Utah, and look at how we can do acute and subacute care at home, including infusions and maybe chemotherapy treatments, for example, and then how we can do screening and risk assessment at home without the patients having to come to the Huntsman. And then, my part in this is to do distributed clinical trials. So how can we do these decentralized clinical trials at home? So we're going to build on this model. And again, we're starting here in the state of Utah because that's where we have the Huntsman at Home program already. But the goal for me in this program is to eventually expand the clinical trials at home to the Mountain West. And then this is my last slide, and I just want to mention this in case you guys have heard of NCORE sites or you are potentially an NCORE site. So this is the NCI's community research program sites. So you can see the blue circles show the community site locations on that map. And the little red triangles show the ones that are specifically designated as minority and underserved locations. And again, you can notice that we do not have any NCORE community sites in Utah or Idaho, unfortunately. So Nevada has one, Montana has one as well. So we have reached out to these NCORE sites that are in these areas to figure out how we can get in better with the community sites there to work on cancer prevention and screening, how we can do supportive care work, surveillance, and how we can do cancer care delivery in these areas. And then again, ultimately, could these be sites or hubs for our decentralized clinical trials so that patients in these rural and frontier areas could stay at home and yet potentially have access to some of these newer therapies. And I think that is my last slide, Allison. So thank you all. And I think we're happy to take any open questions right now, that if you wanted to turn your camera on or raise your hand or put them in the chat. And the panel, Lacey's going to be up next with the community spotlight, and then Jessica and Gayatri, our HCI clinical trials office leaders here, and they're going to be talking about what support we have available here at Huntsman for those of you out in the community.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Werner. Yes, we do have time for question and answer. So if you have something specific, feel free to chat it in the chat box, unmute, raise your hand, whatever you prefer. I do have a series of questions for our clinical trials office and clinical affiliate site, as well as for you all as participants, because I think we're hoping to learn a little bit from you as well. So I'll go ahead and kick it off while I give you all time to think about your questions. But my first question is for our presenters. I think it would be really beneficial for us to sort of describe what recruitment looks like for clinical trials in a setting such as HCI, but also how that might differ in a place like Rock Springs.
I'm happy to answer that. I'm Jessica Maley, and I'll be talking to you a little bit more about some of our clinical trials infrastructure, but the recruitment primarily at Huntsman Cancer Institute happens a little more organically. Patients may have had a diagnosis already or are coming for a second opinion, and they will be referred into a disease team specifically looking at their type of cancer and treating their types of cancer. Those providers and doctors themselves are actually leading clinical trials that are happening at our institution. So that with the discussion with the patient, the evaluation of what's going to be best for their treatment, they will discuss potential clinical trials. And as we just mentioned, and Dr. Werner said in the slides, that there are clinical trials for all various types of oncology practices. And so we will be looking at those in addition to what standard therapies might be most appropriate. So it just kind of happens around that individual patient's situation. And every disease team at Huntsman has clinical trials in their portfolio that they're working on, that they're assessing and evaluating. Every clinical trial has a really unique set of eligibility criteria. So inclusion and exclusion. So, as individual patients are having assessments done, those PIs and those doctors that are working with them will kind of know what eligibility are key to be watching for any one particular patient. And they'll be making those assessments sort of in conjunction with their overall work that they're doing with the patients, and talking to the patients about their options for care. If a clinical trial does seem like the right fit, potentially, there is a more robust consenting process and workup to make sure they meet all those eligibility criteria. And so that's something that if the patient is interested in pursuing, will be sort of another discussion next step. So that's sort of what happens in the setting at the Huntsman Cancer Institute. And then maybe Lacey could speak to how it might happen in an affiliate type of institution.
Yeah, so I just kind of echo what you're saying, Jessica, and I do go into it a little bit in my presentation, so I can touch on it more there, but it is kind of a similar workflow.
And I just wonder, I saw a chat, there is a question from Carrie about like whether the patient has to be seen at HCI or they can go to affiliate site. So we are trying to activate trials at affiliate sites. If that a particular study is open at the affiliate sites, definitely the patient can go and be enrolled there and get the care over there. If not, they will be referred to HCI at that point.
And I do want to say, we've been sort of focused on, drug trials, for example, or interventional treatment trials, like we call them. But there is a lot of research being done by HCI and our community outreach and engagement group with other kinds of clinical trials or research. So are there the screening trials happening in your communities? Absolutely. And those are being done in your communities. For example, one of our investigators, Dr. Wetter, who's involved with health equity, he has a large trial looking at smoking cessation. So these patients, do not even have cancer yet, and they're participating in, clinical research. We use all different kinds of tools for recruitment. So videos, emails, links to our website. Text messaging we have found is, very helpful for the younger generation, and social media. Us old people, we're not used to looking at social media for things related to health, but the young folks really are. So just being creative about ways that we can introduce opportunities for these patients. So again, not just drug treatment trials, but there's all kinds of work. Sun safety, looking at sun safety and how long you're out in the sun and whether you should put sunscreen on. That's all the other kinds of research that people are doing at Huntsman. That's out in the community, out in your communities now as well.
Great.
I think
Thank
that's
you
the
all
biggest
so much.
distinction is being able to draw the treatment of a cancer patient versus the research and the clinical trial opportunities studying cancer in a more broad population.
Yeah, and I think Carrie put a comment in there that they're participating in Dr. Wetter's research, which is great. So again, I think a lot of the sites that we, reached out to and did needs assessment, they were overwhelmed thinking about how are we going to do chemotherapy trials and things like that at our small center. Well, that may be way later, if never, unfortunately, depending on what the infrastructure and capabilities are at your sites. But again, we like to introduce this concept of, hey, participating in a research study or helping us understand, cancer prevention, diagnosis of cancer, those kinds of things, so that there are what we would call like much more lower hanging fruit or easier things for community sites to do. That would be a really good way to just get started. And, there's some great collaborations. And again, it's a way to serve patients. And again, not just at cancer sites or cancer hospitals, right? So at community centers for our American Indian, tribal communities as well. So good things to think about if you guys are interested in, even getting your feet wet if you haven't done any of that research yet. That's what we're here to help you with.
Great, thank you all so much. One other question in the chat before I move on to my next question. Does the cancer screening and education bus plan to expand to other areas in the Mountain West?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Garrett, you can interrupt me if I say anything wrong. So there are rules and laws about state lines. And so I think that's why we've been creative at going to the border, like Wendover, for example, and have people cross over. I think this really goes to our policy group here, who's doing advocating to sort of say, hey, could there be this Mountain West collaborative for these states so we're not restricted by state? So I think that would be the eventual goal. Can we do this mobile screening across state lines? And Garrett, I welcome if you have any other further insights into that.
Yeah, and I think Lynette, you're on the call, so feel free
Oh.
to chime in.
Yeah, Lynette is our expert. Lynette.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, we are restricted to Utah currently because we are part of the state of Utah government, technically. And state risk management covers us for liability. So we're restricted by that. And then we're also restricted by licensure for our mammography techs and for the radiologists who read. So currently we are kind of restricted to Utah, but we're looking at options.
And I'll just briefly add to that, thank you, Lynette, is, even though physically our bus may not be traveling, Lynette has been collaborating with many others throughout the Mountain West on some cancer screening initiatives so that we know that there's other buses in other states. We know that there's other health systems who are doing innovative things, either through their breast and cervical cancer programs or their comprehensive cancer programs. And so there's a lot of collaboration that's happening. It may not be physically under the umbrella of the bus, but a lot of interventions happening. And I think, potentially for a future webinar for the collaborative, one of the things that has also come up as a priority is cancer screening and how we can maybe, have that as a deep dive into one of these topics as well. So Kaylee, great question. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just say one other thing. Allison, when she introduced me, said my specialty is gynecologic cancers. And one of the newer things that we're doing in screening, so cervix cancer screening, how many patients love to come in and, have a pelvic exam and a pap smear? Zero. No, nobody wants to do that, right? So number one, vaccination is important. So that's a primary prevention technique that we can do for our young boys and young girls. But one of the things that we're working with the NCI on is self-collection of samples for cervical cancer screening, something that I didn't even know really existed until recently. So again, be looking for that, because that could be something that would be really easy for communities to participate in, and patients would find that much more invasive or traumatic than coming into the doctor. So again, a way to, get the word out and education about cancer screening to our communities.
Thank you all so much. I have one more question for our presenters before we sort of shift and ask our participants some questions. There are a lot of people on this call that work in community-based education settings, community outreach settings. So I think my question for our presenters is thinking about clinical trial education. What role do community outreach programs and partners play in increasing awareness and really confidence and participation in clinical trials in their communities?
Yeah, I can start, and anybody from the panel, feel free to reach out. So, we have a lot of printed material, but we now know that that's not the easiest thing to get out to people, right? People like to, like I said, do things on their phones or, on the internet or whatnot. So again, getting a lot of that information, the toolkit that, we have, developed, Gayatri's been key in that to get out the education. But again, a lot of people are thinking, oh, we're not doing cancer clinical trials, so we don't need to educate people about clinical research or clinical trials. But again, like I said, it could be something, in the community, smoking cessation, right? We know that smoking is high in a lot of states in the Mountain West, and participating in some kind of research. So again, introducing the idea of research to the patients without intimidating them, thinking they're a test subject, for example. So again, so we have lots of resources, and Garrett and Allison's office, the Community Outreach and Engagement Office, we have a lot of tools, and we're happy to, you know, sit down or meet with any of y'all to kind of go over some of these processes to help you to even have that conversation with patients in your community centers that may not be related to cancer even.
And also to add, like Rachel and Allison, Kathy in her team, like that team is developing a broader toolkit for and integrating all the components like patient navigation, clinical trials, everything together so that it is helpful for the community.
And I think for those of you that maybe are not even involved in community-based work, there's a role we can all play knowing what we know now, maybe from Dr. Werner's presentation and others we'll hear from later, is just the destigmatization of clinical trials, right? And help how we talk about it in the community matters. Understand that these are this is the best cancer research we have, right? And instilling that confidence in people whenever we talk about clinical trials. And so, yeah, some of that can be done in community-based presentations, community health events, but also just in our personal lives and conversations with people that we know. So yeah, thank you. Other comments from presenters before I sort of shift to our participants? Okay. So for those of you on the call that are more of our community-based partners and individuals, we would love to hear from you on a couple of things. When we think about institutions like HCI and the supports that we are attempting to provide to you and your states, what kind of supports are needed for rural and frontier residents when it comes to accessing clinical trials or instilling confidence in clinical trials and changing that narrative and conversation? What kind of things would be helpful for you all to have to be able to promote that in your communities?
And if you guys don't want to speak up, there's only 50 people on the call, so it's not too intimidating. But if that's a problem for you, please just put it in the chat. As Allison said, she's recording it, and we'll go through the chat, and we're happy to reach out to anyone who has a specific comment or question or something that we can address later if you don't want to do it as a group. But I suspect many of you might have the same questions or thoughts as well out in the community.
We have a comment in the chat saying information specifically for providers on how to connect patients to clinical trials, the ease of connecting patients from that provider.
Yeah, so
piece.
we on our so Carrie, and for those of you, we have on our HCI website like how to find a clinical trial, but I agree that sometimes is you could type in breast cancer and find like a whole slew of clinical trials, and as a busy provider might not understand like what my patient is even eligible for. We kind of have it in an algorithm, but through our Huntsman Cancer Hospital affiliate office, so Megan Provost, who hopefully most of you know, she has this glorious book. It's like a paper copy of a Facebook with all of the doctors and all of our contact information, and it's disease specific. So if somebody had breast cancer, they could contact her and she would connect them with people. Also, Jess can talk about our clinical trials office now. You can dial in directly to our clinical trials office or send us an email, or maybe it's an email, Jess, that any of the providers could send an email there, and then we can route it to the particular doctors. And then as the providers get more established in the community, most of them have our cell phones, like if they have somebody with ovarian cancer, they just call me directly and sort of say, but again, trying to streamline those processes again, and it's us making sure that, you know, people out in the community feel comfortable calling us, and, you know, all of us anytime are happy to take calls about potential patients for clinical trials, because we want to help these doctors in the community, again, find maybe the best treatment for their patient. So if you guys don't have contacts with Megan Provost, we can help. Allison's office can help set that up as well. And again, our website, they can email directly, and then we will get them in touch with the right team to help look for potential clinical trials. And again, like I said earlier, maybe even do a first screening visit with the patient via telemedicine, so the patient wouldn't even have to come, but that we could, you know, go over their cancer care and treatment and maybe see if we have something that would fit what they need. And I think later in the presentation, Jessica and Gayatri will have some of that contact information for you guys as well. And so you'll have access to that information from the recording as well.
Many of these questions are meant to be sort of thought-provoking, so please feel free to send me an email later today, later this week, if ideas come up on what would be helpful for you in discussing clinical trials in your communities. For sake of time, I just have one more question for those of you that are willing to chat in or unmute. I would love to know, what materials, if any, are you using to educate your communities on clinical trials? How are those conversations happening? Is it just in the provider setting, or are there broader conversations that are happening? So what does that look like? Or if that doesn't exist, what kind of materials or strategies would be helpful to be able to start those conversations in your communities?
I think Ilfa has a question. Ilfa, you can go ahead and unmute and ask. Great.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say before I ask my question, appreciate all the information shared, and that that presentation was very helpful for me to kind of understand more about clinical trials. So I appreciate that. My question, or not question, but kind of more to that latter part, in that it's not a conversation that we're having. I would say anecdotally, in general, around ethnic communities or diverse communities, about clinical trials. And I will say more specifically to Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander communities, it's also a conversation we're not having. But again, I started to learn about clinical trials as my mother was going through her experience and journey with cancer years past, and that was like the first that I heard about it in a clinical setting. And so all that to say, I think particularly for our older generations within NHPI communities, is to be able to have more information available, translated, whether, you know, infographic information, easy to read, easy to explain, even perhaps presentations that are integrated in community work that can talk to that again, but being translated. So translated documentation, flyers, pamphlets, and such, as well as people speaking about it more in native tongues. Thank you.
Great comment, Sofa. We do, you know, a lot of our materials are Spanish, so we have a lot of our materials in Spanish. And for our clinical trials, we have translated in, I don't know, I think it's like 300 different languages, at least the short form for consents. But again, I think it's really important if you have a person that speaks a native language to be able to communicate. I mean, we do our best through interpreters, but it's always nice. And that's why it's great, like you said, with you and your mom, to, you know, have family members there as well. We find that it's not only an education thing, it's a trust thing. And so building that trust and developing that relationship with these populations is really important. And, you know, we are lucky in Utah. We have a large Pacific Islander population here, and they are very interested in clinical trials. So we've been really fortunate working with that population for sure.
All right, thank you so much to our presenters and to our participants for your contributions to this discussion. For sake of time, we are going to move on to our next presenter. So we're going to hear now from Lacey Reddick. Lacey Reddick is the clinical trials facilitator with Sweetwater Regional Cancer Center. Lacey has a bachelor's degree of science in pure mathematics from University of Oregon, but an opportunity led her to the healthcare profession. She has been with the clinical trials program at Sweetwater Regional from the very beginning, helping to build it from the ground up. Research became a surprising fit for Lacey, who discovered a passion for helping rural patients and for Excel spreadsheets. Lacey is a fourth generation Wyomingite and has a great pride for her community. So Lacey, I will turn the time over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allison. And thank you for inviting me to speak today. So like Allison said, my name is Lacey. I'm the clinical trials facilitator for Sweetwater Regional Cancer Center. Next slide. And I'm here today just to kind of give you guys an idea of what our clinical trials program looks like, what we do, and kind of any kind of lessons that we've learned. Next slide. So we're part of our county hospital, Memorial Hospital of Sweetwater County. We're located in Rock Springs, Wyoming. We opened our cancer center in June of 2014, and we serve over a 100-mile radius. And we do serve a predominantly rural and frontier population. It's pretty common our patients have to travel a distance to us to receive services. We're often sometimes the closest cancer center to them. The services we offer are radiation oncology services. So we do external beam radiation therapy here, and then medical oncology and hematology services with our chemotherapy and infusion. On staff, we have one medical oncologist who is also a hematologist and one radiation oncologist. So for our clinical trials program, we operate clinical trials as an affiliate site under the University of Utah, or Huntsman Cancer Institute. And we began this process for opening our program in 2018. And then we opened our first study back in 2021. So you'll notice quite a gap there between those years. And that's because it took us a while to kind of get up and running. There's a lot that happens on the front end when you're starting a program like this, with working out your processes and your policies. And so it takes a lot before you can even get to the point of opening your first study or enrolling your first participant. Next slide. So our research team, we're really lucky to have the team that we have. Our primary investigator, Dr. Banu Symington, she's our medical oncologist. She's also a hematologist. And then we have our sub-investigator, Dr. Joshua Binks, who's our radiation oncologist. And we have two coordinators involved in our program. And for those that aren't super familiar with clinical trials, the investigator is the one that's really responsible for like the oversight of trials, making sure we're running them appropriately and making sure patients are eligible to enroll in the studies. But they can delegate a lot of their tasks to their coordinators. And so our coordinators, they do a lot of the legwork, a lot of the day-to-day tasks with clinical trials. And so we have Jason Jones and Eva Wasim, who are both registered nurses in our cancer center, either as a chemotherapy nurse or a radiation oncology nurse. We've been really lucky too to have pharmacy on board from the very beginning of starting our program. And we actually haven't had to utilize pharmacy just yet because we don't have any studies open with any kind of like drug component. But we've been very lucky to have their support from the very beginning. And then we also have myself, and the clinical trials facilitator job role is really specific to our site. We just needed a role to kind of encompass everything else that we would need to run clinical trials. Did you kind of see listed there under my name? But I think it's important to kind of point out that I also can act as a coordinator, and I do from time to time. And I'm not a clinical employee. I'm not a nurse of any kind. And it really does help to have like a clinical background, but it's not required. These are things that we just kind of have learned. And so you can adapt pretty easily, even if you're not coming from a clinical background, to be a coordinator in these kind of things. And then we have our leadership support. So Tasha Harris and Don Piaya are both our directors in the Cancer Center, and we're really lucky that they've been very supportive of our program. And I think when you start any kind of program like this, I mean, of course, it's equally important to have support from your staff and buy-in from your staff, but I think it really makes a difference when you have the leaders behind you for the success of a program. Next slide. So what do we do? What do we look for when we're looking for a study for our site? What kind of studies do we like to open? We open NCTN and NCORE studies, and just kind of a real generalization. That's you can think of those as just publicly funded studies. We don't really open studies that are like done by like private pharmaceutical companies or anything like that. Our current focus is on non-therapeutic studies, but we're not limited to them. And by non-therapeutic, I mean there's not really like a drug or device component to them. I've noticed that our interests really trend to prevention, survivorship, symptom management, or quality of life trials. And then we do open only phase 3 or higher trials. So our clinic staff and our providers, they're the ones that usually find trials that might be in interest to us or that might fit our site. They usually find these either through conferences they attend or just networking with people in their field. Um, and so they'll bring them to me and we'll do like a preliminary review of the study. And there's always two questions I ask myself when we're looking at these studies that might be a fit for us. And the first question is, can we open or can we, excuse me, can we recruit a high number of patients to this study based off of our population and history? So we might find a study that might interest us and we might have a couple of patients that might be eligible for that study at this very moment, but we have to really ask ourselves if it's something we can accrue patients to over the course of a year or a course of 2 years for as long as you have that study open. And then the second question I always ask ourselves is, can we run the trial with the staffing that we have? I don't think it's any different in any other place, but our staffing is our number one resource that we need to run trials. And by nature, clinical trials is very detail-oriented work and very regulated. And so we always have to ask ourselves, what's the time commitment that these studies are asking us to do? And do we have the staff that we can complete these in the time that we're required to complete them? But once we kind of find a study that we really like, we will do a much more rigorous review of it to see if it's something that we can open. And that involves our entire team. It's a team decision when we open up a study. I think it's also really important that we try to find studies that really interest our staff. I think it just adds to staff engagement. And I think it just adds that value that you're really contributing something to clinical research overall. Next slide.
Lacey, if I can interrupt for just a second, for those who are not familiar, can you describe what you mean by a phase 3 trial or higher?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Dr. Warner, her presentation was great. She touched on it a little bit earlier. For the most part, at least with the phase 3 studies that we do, if we're doing any kind of like drug component with a study, and this is very specific to us, but a lot of times the drug has already been FDA approved at that point. And so we're not doing anything like Dr. Warner said, it's not always the case, but like Dr. Warner said, a lot of times what you're doing with phase 3 is you're taking the proposed treatment and you're comparing it to what's the standard of care right now. And you're trying to figure out which one of those two is better. Is it better what we're already doing treating patients, or is it better with this new proposed treatment? And that's kind of the general kind of definition of the phase 3 trials.
Thank you.
So when we find studies that we like, how do we recruit patients to them once we get our studies open? So we do rely heavily on our cancer center providers and staff to identify these patients. They know their patients very well. And we also maintain spreadsheets, like a tracking spreadsheet for each study. And then that helps us to kind of follow up with patients, especially if they're coming in for routine visits. We try to utilize study and institutional review board approved flyers. So for for clinical trials, for the most part, you can't really go and create your own advertising just willy-nilly. A lot of times those things have to pass through a review board. But when they're provided to us by studies, we love to utilize them and we'll post them in our waiting rooms, exam rooms, or hand them off to patients. But I'm also really lucky that I've kind of become part of our cancer center's oncology navigation team. And that includes like a social worker, a dietitian, a financial navigator, and a community navigator. And we host a new patient orientation every month. And the purpose of this orientation is to introduce our new patients to the services that we can offer them, let them know that we're here and how they can contact us. And it provides me with a really good opportunity to kind of educate patients about our clinical trials program, even just to let them know that we're here. And then I will also talk about any trials we have open and hand out flyers if there's something that people might be interested in. I think it's a really good way to like empower the patient too, to speak to their providers if it's something they're interested in. Our providers are really busy and they might not be aware the patient might be a fit or is interested in it. So it's nice that we can kind of give that empowerment to the patient to be their own advocate if there's something they're interested in. But one of the biggest things I think that really helps us with our recruitment is just promoting coordinator availability. I think our providers and our clinic staff, they are so busy, as as everybody I'm assuming is throughout the nation, and their schedules are very tight. So I think it really helps when we tell our providers that, if you're just willing to start that conversation and open that door for us, you can have one of your coordinators come in and we will just continue it from there and go more in depth. And I think it really promotes more provider engagement because they know that they can start the conversation, and even if they want to talk more about it but they know they don't have the time because of their clinic schedule, they can pass it off to their coordinators, and the coordinators can really answer any questions and go in depth. And I think that's been really key for our recruitment strategies. So how do we ensure retention and compliance for each study now that we're enrolling patients and opening studies? We utilize checklists a lot. We had a study provide us with a checklist one time, and I loved it so much. I implemented it for other studies. But these checklists are great. We make them study specific. So they'll remind us to do things for the study, but also we put in things that are site specific because there might be things that we have to complete that are really specific to our policies. And these checklists are really great because our accrual in our site is slow, and so we don't have the chance to exercise our clinical trial skills on a daily basis. And there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to running a study. So checklists are really key in helping us make sure we don't forget anything for each time point. We also try to utilize really basic tools like EMR and Outlook reminders. So, when we enroll studies on or enroll patients on studies, they might have a time point in 30 days, or they might have a time point in 6 months or 2 years from now. And so even just simple tools like Outlook reminders, we utilize a lot so we don't miss those time points. We really try to take advantage of our small facility size as well. So our small size can be like a limitation, but it can be an advantage as well. It's pretty common for me to walk into one of our departments for another reason, and I'll see one of my clinical trial participants sitting in the waiting room, and I can pull them aside and we can have a conversation about how their study's going, if there's anything I have to remind them of. But it also gives me a chance to talk to our staff. I might approach our staff and say, hey, I see so-and-so's on your schedule today for a routine visit. I need to talk to them about a time point that's coming up, or they might be interested in this study, and our staff is really good about following through with that. And then we also have routine staff meetings. We have a monthly staff meeting for our whole team, but then we also have a monthly staff meeting just for our coordinators. And I think it really helps when we separate those roles because there's a lot of things the coordinators do that not everybody else needs to be aware of. And we can take that time and go more in depth on things or updates that they need to be aware of. Next slide. So any barriers, successes, or lessons we've learned? I don't think it'll come to as much as a surprise to anybody on the call, but I think the biggest barrier we have is our staffing. So in that previous slide that I covered about our research staff, I'm the only one on that list that is full-time dedicated to clinical trials. Everybody else on that list is doing clinical trials on top of their regular full-time clinic duties. And so it's been kind of a challenge finding a balance between those multiple roles and finding the availability so they can complete those tasks. And I think that's our biggest barrier in trying to recruit a high number of patients, open up more studies or more complicated studies. And we're such a small site that we just don't really have it in us to create new roles that are just dedicated to clinical trials. But we've had a lot of successes. I think I'm really proud of the collaboration that we've built with our internal departments, just building that relationship and trust with people like from lab, billing, and pharmacy. When we started our clinical trials program, it started really insular, and it was just something the Cancer Center was doing. But then as we started opening up more studies, it would add in different components like lab and billing, and we had to start bringing in these other departments. And for the most part, throughout our hospital, not a lot of people are really familiar with research or clinical trials. And so it's been really great that they really put a lot of trust in me to know the clinical trial side. And then I just trust and know they have such great expertise in their discipline. And we just have really collaborated and worked well together. And they've all been very supportive. It's been amazing. Whenever I approach a new department and want to ask them, like, will you help us with something with clinical trials? My biggest goal is to not change their workflow as much as possible, and the less minimize the impact on them. So the more that I can adapt to their workflow, I think it benefits not only just our relationship together, but also just the study overall, so that we know that the same thing is happening with every patient every time. We also love taking opportunities to network and build relationships outside of our facility. So we try to join our clinical trial conferences as much as possible, and that's for education reasons and for updates, but also just to network with people in the industry. We try to take advantage of joining any kind of discipline-specific groups. So for example, I think it was the Huntsman that connected me with that Association of Research Integrity Officers. So the research integrity officer is something really specific to clinical trials. So I won't go into that because you probably don't want to hear anything about it, but I'm our research integrity officer for our site. And it can be a little intimidating role, but it's been so wonderful just connecting and joining on these calls. And I don't ever contribute anything to the calls, but I just listen to these people that have so much knowledge and so much experience, and they're just bouncing ideas off each other or doing hypotheticals. And it's really just relieved a lot of like stress or fear I might have in that role just because they're educating me. And so I think it's so amazing when we get a chance to be a part of those kind of groups. And we also love connecting with and helping others that are passionate about rural cancer care. We were approached and had helped a little bit recruit some patients to some studies with Montana State University and the University of Wyoming's nursing program. And they had studies ongoing about rural cancer care and like the barriers the patients might have in getting their treatments. And I think it's just so fulfilling and wonderful when we can connect with other people that are passionate about what you're passionate about. And we're trying to just prop each other up and help each other out, because at the end of the day, it's our patients that benefit from all of these studies. But I think one of our biggest successes is really our mentorship with the Huntsman. I really don't know how we could have opened a program like this without their guidance and direction. They have been so amazing. Gayatri and Jessica, actually, you'll hear after my talk, they're part of the team that I've been in contact with a lot, and they've always been so patient and amazing, and I really, really value the relationship we've built with them. Next slide. So our plans for the future. In the immediate future, of course, we'd love to increase recruitment, maybe looking at different ways of expanding and exploring recruitment strategies. I've seen some studies that have built in like advertising or Facebook advertising into their studies. Like I said before, you can't always just go and create those yourself without it passing through a review board. That's for like the protection of the rights of the participant. But I think it'd be wonderful and exciting to try to utilize those more if they're built into the study. But there's also a lot of things we can do locally. For example, we have a smoking cessation trial open here right now. And in our clinic, we record smoking history on every patient with every visit. And so it's very easy for me to go in there and pull our EMR reports and just see, is there anybody that we're missing or anybody that might be interested in our study? I also think it's really important to take advantage of training opportunities, even if they're not clinical trial specific or specific to a program you're trying to run, but you applying it to your program. For example, I was really, really lucky to be a part of a group of us from the Cancer Center that got to attend the American Society of Clinical Oncology's quality training program. And that's like their quality improvement training program. And then also I'm a part of a group that's currently doing the American Cancer Society's Leadership in Oncology Navigation program. And both of these trainings, they're not clinical trial specific, but the skills that I'm learning here, I'm looking to apply to our program and look at our program in a methodical way of how can we improve processes here? How can we increase recruitment? So that's something that I'm hoping to do in the immediate future that I'm very excited about. In the distant future, we'd love to expand the number of studies and the type of studies we open, maybe try something a little more complicated with treatment trials or radiation therapy trials. But overall, our long-term goal is just to grow our program. I think the biggest thing we want to do here is just provide opportunities to our rural cancer patients that they might not have otherwise. And in turn, we're providing this really important rural cancer patient experience and data to these researchers. And that's really underrepresented right now in clinical trials. And the more that we can provide this demographic to these researchers, the more their study population will represent the true population that will receive those treatments once they're out of clinical trials. And I think that's really important. That's kind of what we're really hoping to accomplish here with our program. And I think that's my last slide. So I'm always happy if you guys ever want to email me or if you have any questions about anything I talked about here. I'm always happy to receive you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lacey. I think it's always great to hear success stories about how our affiliate sites are doing with clinical trial work. So that leads me to transition to our last presentation from our clinical trials office here at Huntsman Cancer Institute. We're going to hear from Jessica Maley, who has over 18 years of clinical research experience. Her time consists of directing operations for the clinical trials office for the past 9 years. She was recently named the newly created role of Senior Director of Clinical Research. Excuse me, I butchered that. Senior Clinical Research Administrative Director at Huntsman Cancer Institute. And then we'll hear from Gayatri Nachagari, who oversees the National Cancer Institute program for Huntsman Cancer Institute, which includes 2 different grants that are doing clinical trials under those grants. And so she has been instrumental in clinical trial initiatives for HCI and for our affiliate sites. So turning the time over to you both.
Thanks, Allison, and thanks for allowing us to be here today to talk to you a little bit about some more details of clinical trials. We hope this is helpful for you. So what we're currently doing is what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today, and we'll go over some resources and some different things. So next slide. So this is kind of our leadership structure. I know it's really small here to see, but we have a very large program here at Huntsman dedicated to clinical trials. We have a robust leadership team. Our staff are organized by disease, specifically within an oncology space, and we're running about 250 clinical trials that are open to new patient accrual right now, and that's specifically in the treatment space. There's over 335 or so available if we add in those prevention and observational studies that we're running out of Huntsman also. So a very large team of individuals overseeing these areas, and we want to make sure that it's known in our region and through the area we serve that we have disease-specific clinical trials and experts in these areas that we want to make available to patients to either come here and participate in or work with you to see what we can do to keep things in your local community while also participating in research. Next slide. So these are some screenshots that hopefully will be helpful for you all, but there's several links on our public-facing website about clinical trials that may be helpful for you. There's the links here about the clinical trials office support, a virtual tour for clinical trial kind of sponsors more so what our facility looks like, what kind of capabilities we have. We use this more for external partnerships of people that are wanting to run a clinical trial with us. But it may be interesting for you all as well to take a look at. And then kind of our clinical trials organization. So this is kind of the administrative structural slide. Next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the different types of trials we support. There's different kinds of studies that are sponsored in certain ways. IITs, or investigator-initiated studies or trials, are those that we have developed and are running internally. That's the second bullet here. Industry-sponsored are a bulk of our trials. Those are the ones that are being run by the drug manufacturers. So every drug or treatment that's on the market came through a clinical trial first before it was deemed, the new treatment option and best standard of care for any indication. So helping our patients understand that what they might be getting, over the counter or prescribed by their doctor and paid for by their insurance is going to be something that has gone through clinical trials. And then the NCI stands for the National Cancer Institute. And those are the federally funded studies that are also sponsored. So various types, we do them all. They all have treatment trials available. They all have preventative and supportive care and observational type studies, some of those different trial types we talked about earlier today. Next slide. So this is sort of a portfolio of that distribution of what those mean. Some of these aren't here, but the externally peer reviewed are also part of that federal group. The national group are part of those NCI federal groups. So you can just see what we kind of have from our distribution of, this is 2023. It looks very similar for 2024. How many trials we have are in the portfolio distribution, and then how many patients accrued to those trials during that calendar year. Next slide. So just for the treatment trials, we're enrolling about 600 new patients to clinical trials every single year that are treatment specific. So patients coming here from all over the Intermountain West to have their cancer treatment and ended up being enrolled on a study. We had some great successes in 2021. We have some really strategic, high impact studies that came forward from those investigator initiated. And then we had a little more of a dip again. It fluctuates, you know, depending on just where the patients are coming from, how many are being seen. The gray line is how many are consented. So you can see the difference when I talked about those eligibility criteria early on. A lot of patients consent, but then don't meet one or two criteria that, you know, would prevent them from going on those trials. That's why we like to have a lot of trials in our portfolios to make sure that maybe they screen failed or didn't meet all the eligibility for one trial, but there might be another one that is there that's more appropriate. So they might consent twice, or, you know, if they have a recurrence or some kind of additional, you know, evolution of their cancer, there will be another trial in the wings for their second or third line therapy, for example. Next slide. So here's just some numbers for some of the work that we have done with those outside of Huntsman walls. We have some satellites that are just in the local proximity here in Salt Lake City, 20 minutes, you know, north, south, and west of us for access to some clinical studies. Sugar House is not that far away, so we are able to get quite a few studies going there. And then our VA here is doing some of these NCI trials that Gayatri and her team are running, similar to those being done at Lacey's site, which is the MHSCC in Wyoming, Grand Valley. And then some implementation and discussions ongoing with our other affiliates for St. Peter's in Helena and Madison in Idaho and St. John's in Wyoming. Next slide. So this is another slide that might be helpful for you all, and some links. The hyperlink is at the bottom. So more additional information about what clinical trials are. There's some videos, some more written text to kind of for the general public about what clinical trials are and how to participate. These hyperlinks on this page. Next slide. And then this is a little further down on that same page is a clinical trial search that's a little more patient friendly and one for your providers. And so this is where we do guide a lot of our providers in the community to go and click here. And then once you click there, the next slide will bring up the different diseases. So they can see, you know, what kind of disease they're looking for a patient in particular. And see if they might want to refer to a trial. This is if they have interest in the trial specifically or referring for a trial. If they do not want to go through all this, that's okay. They just need to send us an email, and that should be on the next slide, I think. Yeah, there it is. So see this highlight here in yellow is an HCI clinical trial referrals at hci.utah.edu. So that's the new email kind of setup that we wanted to make easy for providers to hopefully remember. And we know how Outlook kind of saves your contacts or saves your people you've emailed before. If they can just push an H or type in HCI to on the to column of their email and send something, you know, put PHI in their subject line or give us some key information looking for a trial for a patient with X, Y, and Z, we will make sure that gets routed to a provider and a new patient kind of contact, and we will get back with you to make sure we can talk to you or get you set up with a call, whether that be a nursing team, an administrative team, a provider team, to refer those patients appropriately. So anyway, we've kind of talked about these few things and we've already run out of time. I'm realizing we were already to the 1 o'clock top of the hour. But that's the main point I wanted to get across was this piece. And then I don't know if people have to drop off, I totally understand, but Gayatri can also just do the last few her slides specifically.
Yeah, I can check with Allison. Do you want me to for the next webinar, do you want to keep it or do you want me to continue with this?
I think I'm going to welcome those of you that need to drop off. We want to be respectful of your time. Go ahead and hop off. But since we're on here and we are recording, I would say let's go ahead and finish, and we'll make sure to send the recording out to those of you who cannot stay. But it should wrap up in the next like 3 to 5 minutes. And so we're very, very close. Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, next slide. Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. So far, we have heard why from Dr. Warner why cancer research is important, and Jessica also discussed what currently we are doing. So next would be how, right? So any institution planning for clinical research need to comply with several regulatory requirements to protect their patient safety and integrity. I will just take few minutes to give you a brief overview of how we support in this journey. Next slide. First and foremost requirement for an institution to have is the federal-wide assurance. It's called FWA, and it is an assurance of compliance with the US federal regulations for protection of human subject in research. As you can see in this diagram, two financially different entities can affiliate to run clinical research. However, they have to have their own FWA. And we, as an parent institute or the signatory institute, we definitely support the affiliate teams or a new institution to with all the regulatory requirements. So, which will go into my next slide. Can you just move to next slide? Yeah. So at HCI, we have implemented few strategies. First one was an onboarding after experience, Lacey, you have heard, and our Grand Valley Oncology, who is our first affiliate center. From the experiences we have learned what the requirements are, we have put together an onboarding guide, and also we have established an affiliate site committee to implement and oversee the process of National Cancer Institute trial activation at affiliate sites. And what this guide is helping us with is reducing the time of site activation, streamlining the processes, and keeping a check on all the compliances. And the next, what we are going to work is the operational logistics, improving the operational logistic, minimizing the efforts for everybody, and venturing into additional clinical trials like IIT trials, which Jessica just was trying to explain, like IIT trials or the industry trials. And the next one would be which Dr. Warner was discussing in depth, was the decentralized trial, which we are currently working on. Next slide, please. So now let's take an onboarding process. What does those entail, right? Like the first step is to establish a legal agreement between the two institutions. And the next step we check is if the site has key infrastructures that are required to run clinical research. Then thereafter, what we do is help fulfill all the clinical research requirements and memberships like FWA, OHRP requirements, and others. Also, there are a few other things we will talk in depth. If you are interested, we'll be happy to talk about those. And then thereafter, we go into the regulatory requirements like the IRB memberships, help site develop their policies and SOPs. And thereafter, we help with the operational logistics like training of investigators and staff, regulatory requirements for each protocols, financial management, and trial conduct. And then something which is ongoing process will be like establish, we are overseeing our all the affiliate centers, like our research compliance office reviews the compliance of all the patients who are enrolled on the study, like if the sites are doing okay. And so far we have really good success, both all three of our affiliate sites who have onboarded with us, but they did go through our research compliance audit reviews, as well as the SWOG is an NCI's department branch, and they have cleared their audits so well, and all the audit teams had only good praises about, including Lacey's team. Recently, they underwent that audit. So next slide, please. And this slide, just I'll briefly touch about the basic facility requirements for a affiliate site to run clinical trials. You know, if the center is interested in running a trial with a biospecimen, the following, the first bullet point identifies like what type of equipments you need. And the next, the second point is the regulatory requirements to run clinical trials. Everything has to be Part 11 compliant. Then if a facility if a institution wants to run radiation trial, then there are certain credentials, and we walk them through those processes. And if an institution wants to run a treatment trial, they need to have an investigational pharmacy, and what those pharmacy requirements are. They are just, what we have so far discussed is just an overview of the process. We are open for further discussions, and our affiliate site committee is always willing to support with any logistical support. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to our presenters today for sharing this great information with us all. I think hopefully, your takeaway is, yes, clinical trials are complex, but there is a lot of support that exists within HCI and our affiliate sites to help those that are interested. So I'm going to go ahead, for sake of time. We will just say, if you have questions, please feel free to email me. You should all have our email at community@hci, and or you can email me directly, and we can answer those questions via email. But I'm going to go ahead and conclude. Thanks for hanging on with us about 8 after the hour, and we look forward to hosting our next Mountain West Cancer Collaborative webinar in August. So thank you all so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.